can we succeed as a country where a shrinking number of people do exceedingly well while a growing number struggle to get by.
Like President Obama, Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton wants to solve his state's fiscal woes by raising taxes on top earners.
My father's favorite quote was from the Bible, "To whomsoever much has been given, of him shall much be required."
During his run for governor in 2010 and before the state government shut down in 2011, Dayton proposed raising income taxes to 10.95% on the top 2% of earners. Since then, he's refrained from naming specific numbers, though after the 2012 election, Dayton said he still wants the wealthy to shoulder a larger tax burden.
Once I step over that line and into this policy and that, I mean, there are probably 40 or 50 different policies that people are going to want to know what my position is today. I mean, I'll say on the tax one, I mean, for me, that's not a slogan, that's a conviction.
But now that Obama has ceded big ground to Republicans during the fiscal cliff negotiations on how much to tax the wealthy and who fits into that top tax bracket, it's an open question whether Dayton will make good on his pledge or whether his action will merely be symbolic.
I sure hope he does. He promised it. He's been sticking with it so far. Governor Dayton, please stick to your guns. Raise the taxes on the rich. Help out the middle class. Then everybody is going to gain.
It's time to balance the budget on the backs of somebody else, somebody that has the money, and that's the wealthy of Minnesota.
Free our people! Free our people!
It's vital that working people speak up and put demands on Governor Dayton, on Democrats in the legislature, and make it absolutely clear that the situation as it exists cannot continue.
Heading into the 2012 legislative session, the state Democratic Party controls both the governor's mansion and the state House and Senate for the first time in decades. Raising taxes on the rich would help carve away Minnesota's daunting $1.1 billion deficit.
Your children and grandchildren.
But will Dayton stick to his word? And will he get enough legislative support to make the state's tax system more progressive?
I don't want to soak the rich. I just am a little more concerned that we're drowning the middle class. Lower income people, they're paying a lot more of their household income in state and local taxes than those at the top end are. You have to question, why are we doing it this way, and why are we defending that?
The GOP's war on revenues has disabled the state so that if Minnesota's budget were a stool, it would be lopsided, one that couldn't stand up. That's the metaphor that Revenue Commissioner Myron Frans likes to use.
There are three primary sources, as I mentioned, the sales tax, the property tax, and the income tax. And in the 1970s, that's when these three taxes really became pretty balanced. They typically would be about 1/3. So we took a look at 1999 and said, well, what does it look like in 1999? So let me hold this up here. So we went to 1999 and we said, with respect to these three major sources of revenue, how do they look relative to one another? At that time, the property tax was about 30.4% of the three sources. The sales tax was about 34.7%. And the income tax was about 34.8%. Let's fast forward to 2010. So if you bring up 2010, then you take a look at these three sources. You see the income tax revenues come down a little bit. It's at 33.6%. If you look at the sales tax, it's down to 26.6%. The property tax now is almost 40% of the three sources of revenue, 39.8%. And this structural balance is something that we're very concerned about. We've been relying more and more on property taxes to fund local and state government, and we've been relying less and less on sales tax and income tax. The governor would like to see these three legs evened out over time.
According to Frans, Dayton's plan to raise tax rates in the top 2% of Minnesotans would raise another $300 million over the biennium. But that would still account for only 27% of the $1.1 billion budgetary hole. So what to do about the rest?
If we went back to the tax brackets we had in the late 90s, that would more than resolve the deficit, and it would enable us to begin moving forward on education funding. When Governor Dayton first came out 2 years ago with his budget, his initial budget had a 10.95% top tax bracket. And then he had a temporary surcharge of 3% above that for people making more than $500,000 a year. The wealthy folks who would be paying more money under that tax would actually benefit from it because they'd have safer communities, a better educated workforce.
But the question remains, will Dayton get DFL support to raise taxes on the rich?
Elements in the DFL that always been supportive of retail trade, small business, may feel threatened by some of the changes that are about to take place. They shouldn't, but they may feel that way. They shouldn't, because a progressive tax system taxes those with significant benefits from the society.
Professor Berman says that Dayton's biggest ally might not be the legislature, but grassroots support.
Grassroots does not come just from the grass itself. The roots have to be watered and nurtured. The watering and the nurturing and the fertilizer are, in fact, the organizations that, in fact, motivate people.
Organizations like the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, which advocates for fair taxation and social justice issues in Minnesota.
In religious congregations, we're fond of talking about stewardship, pledging a portion of what we have for the good of a community. Well, it's completely analogous. It's what we pay to have the kind of public services and public infrastructure that we rely on. We definitely look at the state's budget as a moral document.
A lot of people are willing to invest if they feel it's fairly collected and wisely spent. And they often don't have confidence in either of those two things. So I think the important thing is to make it real clear, here's where the money is needed, here's what we benefit from this.
Now that the power in the state legislature has changed hands in consecutive elections, some Democrats worry that if they propose legislation that's too bold, voters might rebuke them in 2014, when Dayton is also up for re-election. That might make some reticent to work with the governor and raise taxes.
The risks are that the economy is not going to grow as fast as it should, that there will still be significant difficulties, and that he'll be blamed for it.
The risk is not the DFL being too bold. The risk is the DFL being too scared to do what it said it was going to do. It seems to me if we said we were going to fund education in early childhood and make sure we have safer communities, we better do that.
Our state's most successful citizens have achieved so much. I ask you please to help our state, your children and grandchildren, your friends and your neighbors, to regain what you and I have enjoyed so much and benefited from so greatly during our lives here in Minnesota. Please help us restore Minnesota to greatness.